So there is a bunch of information how the Cataclysm zones had progressed since we had left them at this point nearly 13 years later. We know Firelands had changed with the new elemental lord, big parts of Mount Hyjal were updated and changed despite the Legion destroying that big well. There were updates to the Maelstrom, we know the new Naga presence is in Vash'jir, we had discovered a new town in Kezan quite recently, and there are a bunch of Gilneas restoration hints amongst a bunch of other hints. So what has been going on with the by now old Cataclysm zones? Let's list every single hint that we have zone by zone. So the Ridge Wallet, the perfect minimalist, sleek design that is really simple but also super cool at the same time. You can fit up to 12 cards, there's cash on the side, there's over 30 designs, there's a lifetime warranty. They also started making key cases as well that can perfectly match your wallet. Now, make sure to use my code DORON to get a 10% discount, and also check out my link in the description, so ridge.com/DORON. A lot of us see the Cataclysm zones as a revamp, a change of the old world of Azeroth, but it is really interesting to think that twice as much time has passed since the revamp zones and the shattering than it was actually original in Azeroth, so at this point the original Azeroth is a bit more unique than the changed one. However, Cataclysm wasn't just about reshaping Kalimdor, the Eastern Kingdoms, but we have actually received a bunch of new zones such as Vash'jir, Uldum, Kezan, Deepholm, and a bunch of other zones and sub-zones, and seeing that nearly 13 years had passed since then, what has really happened to those zones? With a bunch of NPC info and books and other hints, there is actually quite a bit of information. So starting off with the Maelstrom, really the most unique zone. Realistically, this is hardly a zone in the conventional terms, but it is really the most important part of Azeroth. It is where the Well of Eternity was, the center of the world, and this chaotic, massive whirlpool of energies. We have defeated Etme here, and this place was actually mentioned multiple times since that point. During Legion, the Earth Ring held an emergency meeting in this place. We managed to discover a lost titan facility known as the Primordial Observatory in the near proximity of Maelstrom. However, the biggest amount of new info happened in BFA. A ton of Azerite erupted here, as this was the original wound that the Titans had created when they pulled out Y'Shaarj all those thousands of years ago. So naturally, when Sargeras stabbed Azeroth at the end of Legion, this was the biggest leak of Azerite. We did manage to fix it eventually to calm down the place, and Magni told us that while calm, this is still a painful part of Azeroth that will forever remain in this way. We know today the Earthen Ring still looks after the Maelstrom, but I really don't see this place ever calming unless something big happens with the World Soul in the near future, which could definitely be a possibility. Next on the line, we have the most updated zone of all of them, and that is Mount Hyjal and the Firelands. So, we know Ragnaros attempted to burn down Nordrassil during Cataclysm, which never happened. We invaded the Firelands and put an end to him. We then learned in the future that after his death, Firelands were quite naturally in utter chaos. There was a civil war, and eventually Smolderon became the new Fire Lord that even helped us in the battle against the Legion. So, Firelands, despite chaotic by nature, have definitely calmed down, although Smolderon, as far as we know, is still missing at this point in time. We really don't know what is going on with him exactly. However, a lot of things happened in Mount Hyjal itself. My guess is with the calming of the fire elementals, that massive part of the scorched land, just the hellfire, probably decided to an extent and it is no longer just hell on earth. For example, in the book, it was 100% confirmed that a part known as the Circle of Cinders in that forest region of Mount Hyjal was completely restored, and at this point it should look exactly like the rest of the forests of Hyjal. However, it's not all good news and restoration for Mount Hyjal, as when the Legion invaded, some structural changes occurred. We know that the Hyjal's well, the little Well of Eternity, was all but completely destroyed by the Legion, so it's not as it is in the game, with only a tiny bit of magical waters remaining, and the Shrine of Aviana was also destroyed. Then, after the destruction of Teldrassil, Nordrassil was a new home for a bunch of Night Elven refugees. However, overall, as 13 years had passed, if they did revamp Mount Hyjal, it should look a lot more like Enchanted Forests than a battleground that it was back in Cataclysm. Next on the line, we have someone's favorite zone, but most people's most hated zone, and that is Vash'jir, that we do have some info about, but not all that much new stuff. We know back in Cataclysm, the Naga with Ozumat tried to take over Neptulon's power. Well, we could see Neptune in BFA, we even saw Ozumat behind the water wall in Nazjatar, so we know kinda what happened to those guys, sort of, but nothing was really confirmed. However, in regards to the zone itself, all we really know is that it is still a really dangerous place, and that the Naga are are still around. We had a document that confirmed their presence in this area. Now, if they return in Dragonflight, something might change with Vash'jir, but despite not being chaotic as it was in Cataclysm, Vash'jir is, without a doubt, one of the most dangerous places on Azeroth. I'm guessing all those whale sharks are still swimming around the zone. Now, that is not all that much, but we do have some really interesting info in regards to the 2 new race zones that were introduced in Cataclysm. For example, Kezan is still mainly abandoned and a lot of information is missing, but it was mentioned on a few occasions. For example, a ton of Azerite was discovered in Kezan in BFA, and a goblin town survived known as Crepopolis, which was actually used by the venture company to mine Azeroth and get rich, but ultimately that operation was put to an end. I'm guessing since it's been a long time since the volcano exploded, it might be time to return to Kezan in the near future, even discover the probably abandoned mega goblin city of Undermine, which definitely has quite a bit of potential for future content. Now, in regards to Gilneas, we do have a bunch of information. It has constantly been mentioned. We don't have any official confirmations, of course, but with the change in Forsaken leadership, we learned that Hylia has plans to pull out the Forsaken troops, which confirms that they were in charge of at least part of Gilneas at that time. Since that point, that was the end of Shadowlands, the timescape happened, and Dragonflight, so this might have been the fast forward that we needed. Blizzard also, in a post during Shadowlands, mentioned a possible Gilneas restoration questline that we could play through, so overall, we might be getting Gilneas as an actual city, which could include a huge revamp, possibly as soon as we're done with Dragonflight, which could really bunch up Goblin and Worgen Cataclysm races and return them to their homeland. Now, in regards to Tol Barad, there is actual information. We know Tol Barad and Baladin Hold are under Kirin Tor jurisdiction, but they're having a lot of trouble in keeping the peace. Prison breaks happen, they seem to be losing commanders, constantly needing reinforcements, so while it has calmed down, it isn't exactly peaceful and it is still quite chaotic. However, Uldum, on the other hand, has a lot of information and some of the most interesting information out of all these Cataclysm regions. As we know, the storyline back in Cataclysm was all about the Forge of Originations, and it has been relevant ever since. I mean, this really is the most dangerous piece of machinery on the entirety of Azeroth. We know, originally, Ramkaken, the good tol'vir, managed to control most of the zones after we were finished with the questlines back in Cataclysm, and eventually they also took control over Neferset city as well. However, when Sargeras struck quite close to Uldum and Silitus, he unearthed some tombs which caused a lot of trouble. We could see tol'vir traders in Zanderlar, and we learned that by this time the Lost City was taken over by the Ramkaken as well. However, by the end of BFA, a lot of bad things started happening as N'Zoth attacked. You guys can probably play through this, and the Forge of Origination was once again the main focus, and there was some crazy tol'vir joining in on their action with their own plans. As you may know, we did manage to defeat this problem, and we know that the Uldum Accord was created with the Explorers League in order to keep the Forge safe. At the moment, as far as we know, the good tol'vir have control over most of Uldum, although if N'Zoth returns, which he might quite soon, we could be going here once again. In regards to Twilight Highlands, not all that much happened that is significant, but there are some updates. In BFA, some Trogs dug too deep in Grim Atoll and revealed a bunch of Twilight Dragon eggs, which caused quite a problem. The Wildhammer clan was quite scattered with the Legion invasion. We know that Wildhammer was all but destroyed as it was significantly weakened with the defeat of Cho'Gall and Deathwing. So, while not confirmed, the zone should be at this point more Highlands and less Twilight. Now, Deepholm, on the other hand, has been super interesting. There has been some action here. We have actually returned here to ask Terrazane to help us with the Legion when they invaded, and interestingly enough, she had no idea what the Burning Legion even was. I mean, keep in mind, these guys have been locked up here in the Elemental Plane for quite a long time, so they have no idea what has been going on Azeroth. Ultimately though, she did actually help us in the battle. We know that during Legion, the Twilight Hammer was still around in Deepholm, and we have detected some really strange seismic activities that ended up being unexplored, which could be a possible future hint. Then during BFA, we learned that the elementals there are still not fans of the Black Dragon fight because obviously Deathwing destroyed their world pillar and created a shattering. Nonetheless, not all that much is known. The zone itself is super similar to the Zerale Caverns, and with the new elemental and all the other stuff happening in Dragonflight, we could be returning here in the near future. If not to the full zone, then some sort of a questline where we might discuss something with the elemental lords. However, seeing that nearly 13 years had passed since Cataclysm, we really do need a new Shattering of the World or some big event that would not only update and revamp these zones, but really all of Azeroth. Thank you for watching. Check out the undead that Nathan has been raising by clicking on the screen, and check out the Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time.